Ms. Langdon, for God's sake, stop! That isn't a contract. It's a suicide note for your company. The voice, loud and commanding, ripped through the suffocating silence of the 40th floor conference room. Every head snapped toward the source, not toward a rival executive or a dissenting lawyer, but toward the man in the faded blue uniform standing by the glass wall, a spray bottle still clutched in one hand. The janitor. Helena Langdon's Mont Blanc pen froze, its nib hovering a millimeter above the signature line that would finalize the biggest merger of her career. The ink seemed to bleed into the air, the moment suspended in disbelief. Her eyes, the color of slate, and just as hard, locked onto the man. He was tall, gaunt, with tired lines etched around his eyes, but there was no fear in them, only a blazing, desperate certainty. The two Danish executives across the table exchanged a look of pure shock, their jovial, back-slapping demeanor vanishing in an instant. The lead negotiator, a handsome, silver-haired man named Henrik Madsen, was the first to recover. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me?" Henrik's voice was smooth, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "What is the meaning of this? Is this some kind of American joke?" He turned to Helena, his smile strained. "Helena, this is highly inappropriate. I must insist you have this person removed. Immediately." His colleagues began muttering in Danish, their words sharp and angry. They were calling Dawson a madman, an idiot, demanding security be called. They thought no one could understand them. They were wrong. Helena didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't look at Henrik or her own team, who were staring, mouths agape. Her entire focus was on the janitor. He hadn't flinched. He simply held her gaze, the fate of a multi-billion-dollar corporation resting on his anonymous shoulders. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Anyone else would have fired him on the spot. Anyone else would have called security and had him thrown out. But Helena Langdon hadn't built her empire by following the obvious path. She saw things other people missed, and in the janitor's eyes, she saw something that stopped her cold, the terrifying clarity of truth. Finally, she placed her pen down, the click echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. She stood, smoothing the front of her tailored jacket. "This meeting," she announced, her voice calm and lethally quiet, "is suspended." Henrik shot to his feet. "Suspended? Helena, this is an outrage. We have a deal." "We have a disruption," she corrected, her eyes still on Dawson. "My team will see you to your cars. We will be in touch tomorrow to discuss how we proceed." Her tone left no room for argument. It was the voice of a woman who could dismantle a company with a single phone call. The Danish team erupted in protests, but Helena's security detail was already at the door, their presence imposing and final. As Henrik was ushered out, he shot Dawson a look of pure venom, a silent promise of retribution. Within a minute, the room was empty, save for Helena, her chief counsel, and the janitor who had just detonated a bomb in the center of her world. The air crackled with tension. Helena walked slowly around the massive mahogany table until she stood directly in front of Dawson. She looked him up and down, taking in the worn-out work boots, the cheap watch, the name Dawson stitched on his uniform. "You have 60 seconds, she said, her voice dangerously soft. "Explain to me why I shouldn't have you arrested for corporate sabotage and thrown in a hole so deep you'll never see daylight again." The adrenaline that had fueled Dawson's outburst began to fade, replaced by a cold wave of fear. He swallowed hard. "I was cleaning the glass," he started, his voice now lower, rougher. "The meeting was in English, but when you took a break, they started talking in Danish. They were laughing." "Laughing about what?" Helena pressed, her eyes narrowing. "About the addendum. Page 88 of the Danish language copy," Dawson said, the details spilling out of him. "They called it the Trojan horse, a clause that reevaluates patent ownership 6 months post-merger, triggered by market fluctuations they know are coming. It gives them a controlling interest in your entire intellectual property portfolio. They said, They said by the time your lawyers figured it out, you'd be a tenant in your own house. Helena's lawyer went pale, immediately fumbling for his copy of the contract. Helena herself didn't move a muscle, but Dawson saw something flicker in her eyes. It was the chilling glint of recognition. The deal had always seemed just a little too good to be true. Before she could speak again, Dawson glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:47 p.m. A sudden, raw panic washed over him, eclipsing everything else. "I have to go." Helena stared at him, baffled by his abrupt shift. "Go. You're not going anywhere." "My shift is over," he said, his voice pleading. He was no longer a man holding a corporation's fate in his hands. He was just a father running out of time. "Please, I have to be somewhere. It's important." "Nothing," Helena said, stepping closer, "is more important than what just happened in this room." Dawson met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the profound, soul-deep exhaustion behind his fiery resolve. "You're wrong," he whispered. He turned, grabbed his cleaning cart, and walked out of the conference room, leaving the most powerful woman in the city standing in stunned silence. As he fled the gleaming sterile tower, stripping off his work shirt as he ran for the last bus, his mind was no longer on contracts or Danish clauses. It was on the small, quiet room in the pediatric wing of City General Hospital. The smell of antiseptic hit him the moment the elevator doors opened. It was a smell he knew better than his own home. He walked down the hall, past cartoon murals that seemed to mock the grim reality of the place, to room 308. He pushed the door open gently. In the dim glow of a nightlight, he could see her, Ivy, a tiny figure lost in the middle of a large hospital bed, a mess of tubes and wires connecting her to the machines that beeped and whirred softly, a constant, fragile rhythm section for the song of her life. She was awake, a sketchbook propped on her knees. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead, his rough hand stroking her soft, thinning hair. "Hey, Firefly, what are you drawing tonight?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide and unnervingly serious for a 7-year-old. She didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked one of her own, her voice a small, fragile whisper. "Daddy, am I going to become an angel soon, too?" Dawson's breath hitched in his throat. The words struck him with a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs, leaving him hollowed out and aching. He sank onto the edge of her bed, his face crumbling. Ivy looked at him, her expression full of a terrifying, innocent curiosity. "But I don't even know what language angels speak." He fought back a sob, gripping her tiny hand in his. He had risked everything tonight. His job, his freedom, the only source of income that paid for this room, for the doctors, for the faint hope they sold him in hushed tones. And for what? For a company that didn't know he existed. Number. He did it because he couldn't stand the thought of a world where people like Henrik Masson won, while girls like his Ivy had to ask questions like that. He squeezed her hand, forcing a smile that felt like it was tearing his face apart. "No, baby, you are not going anywhere," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And for the record, angels speak the language of love. You're already fluent." She gave him a weak smile, her eyelids fluttering with exhaustion. He sat there, holding her hand, long after she fell asleep. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. Had he just saved her, or had he condemned them both? Just after midnight, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A blocked number. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew, with a sinking certainty, who it was. He stepped into the hallway, the beeping of the machines fading behind him. He took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cold, professional, and held all the power in the world. "Mr. Carretera, this is Helena Langdon's office. She expects to see you at 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." The pre-dawn sky was the color of a bruise as Dawson stepped off the bus. The Langdon Enterprises tower loomed over him, a silent glass and steel giant against the fading night. He hadn't slept. After the call, he had sat by Ivy's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, the rhythmic dance of numbers on the monitors. Every beep was a second of her life he had to pay for. Every beep was a reason he was walking back into this building, not through the service entrance, but through the grand, marble-floored lobby. He wore the same clothes he'd worn to the hospital, jeans and a plain gray Henley, both clean but softened with wear. He felt exposed without his uniform, like a soldier without armor. The night security guard eyed him with suspicion until Dawson gave his name. The guard's eyes widened slightly as he checked his list. "They're waiting for you. Top floor." The elevator ride was a silent, swift descent into a world he didn't belong in. When the doors opened, a severe-looking woman in a black suit was there to meet him. She didn't introduce herself. "This way." Helena Langdon's office was less an office and more a kingdom. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the awakening city. There was no clutter. A massive obsidian desk sat in the center of the room, clean except for a single laptop and a leather-bound folder. Helena was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in her hand, already dressed in a sharp, navy blue power suit. Her chief counsel from the night before, a man named Peters, sat in a chair by the desk, looking pale and sleep-deprived. Helena turned as Dawson entered. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Carretera, thank you for coming." It wasn't a thank you. It was a command acknowledged. She gestured to the chair opposite Peters. Dawson sat. The leather was cold against his back. "Last night," she began, getting straight to the point, "you made an extraordinary claim. You torpedoed a $10 billion merger based on a conversation you alleged to have overheard." "It's what they said," Dawson replied, his voice steady. "You speak Danish," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes. How?" Dawson's jaw tightened. "I picked it up." Helena gave a humorless smile. "People don't just pick up fluent Danish, Mr. Carretera. Especially not the complex legal and financial terminology you seem to be familiar with. So, I'll ask again. Who are you?" "I'm the night janitor." "Stop playing games," she snapped, her patience wearing thin. "Are you a corporate spy? Did our competitor, Omnicorp, plant you here? Because I assure you, whatever they're paying you, I can make it worth your while to tell me the truth." "I work for you," Dawson said, his voice hard. "I clean your floors. That's it." Peters cleared his throat, opening the folder on his lap. "Helena, our initial review of the Danish addendum confirms Mr. Carr's claim is plausible. The language is deliberately ambiguous. On the surface, it reads as a standard patent sharing clause. But if interpreted under certain sections of EU intellectual property law, it could absolutely function as a hostile takeover mechanism. It's brilliant, and it's buried so deep we would never have found it until it was too late." Helena's gaze never left Dawson's face. The confirmation that he was right only seemed to deepen her suspicion. So a man who mops floors for a living has a better grasp of transnational intellectual property law than my entire legal team. Before Dawson could answer, a knock echoed at the door. The severe-looking woman from the hallway entered and handed Helena a thin manila folder. "The preliminary background check you requested, Ms. Langdon." Helena took it, her eyes flicking from the folder's cover to Dawson's face. She opened it. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. Dawson watched her as she read. He saw the slight widening of her eyes, the tightening of her lips. She knew. She looked up from the page, and for the first time, he saw her professional mask crack. She was looking at him as if seeing a completely different person. "It says here your name is Dr. Dawson Carr," she said, her voice a low murmur of disbelief. "PhD in Germanic linguistics from Northwood University. Youngest professor to ever be granted tenure in their department. Published multiple papers on syntactical evolution in Scandinavian languages. Then, 8 years ago, you resigned, you vanished, and now you're here." She closed the folder. "Wiping down my conference tables." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Why are you here, Doctor? The title felt like a slap. It was a name, a life he had buried long ago, a ghost he never wanted to face. He looked past her, out the window at the sprawling city below. He thought of Ivy, of her question about angels. "My daughter is sick," he said, his voice raw. "That's the only answer that matters." Helena stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. The desperation, the night shifts, the sudden departure. "What does that have to do with this?" "The job," Dawson said, finally meeting her eyes. "The janitor job. It came with a comprehensive health insurance plan. No questions asked. The night shift meant I could be at the hospital with her all day. I needed to be invisible, Ms. Langdon. I needed a job that wouldn't show up on anyone's radar. Your company gave me that." A new kind of silence settled over the room. It was no longer suspicion, but a heavy, complex understanding. Helena leaned back in her chair, studying him. She was a woman who dealt in assets and liabilities, in numbers and projections, and she was looking at the most unusual asset she had ever encountered. A brilliant, broken man who had saved her empire not out of loyalty, but out of a father's love. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening again. "That was my head of PR, she said, her voice all business once more. "Henrik Madsen has already gone to the press. He's painting us as unstable, xenophobic, claiming we reneged on the deal at the last minute because of a deranged employee. He's trying to box us in, to force our hand." She stood up and walked to her desk, turning her back to him as she looked out at her city. "He's declared war, and right now, you are the only weapon I have that he doesn't see coming." She turned back around, her eyes blazing with a calculated intensity. "I have a proposition for you, Doctor." Carrageen. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a contract. "This is a temporary consulting agreement. For the next 2 weeks, you work for me. Only for me. You will have full access to our resources. You will tear apart every document related to this merger, every email, every footnote, and you will find me the proof I need to bury Henrik Madsen and his company for good." Dawson stared at the paper, his heart pounding. "In exchange," Helena continued, her voice leaving no room for negotiation, "I will pay you a consulting fee of $200,000, and effective immediately. My company's private insurance will cover 100% of your daughter's medical care. All of it. No limits, no questions asked." Dawson's breath caught. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. It was everything he had ever prayed for. And it was a cage. It meant stepping back into the light. It meant becoming Dr. Dawson Carr again, the man the world thought was a disgrace. It meant facing the very life that had almost destroyed him. Helena pushed a pen across the desk, the same Mont Blanc from the night before. "The world thinks you're a janitor, Dawson. I'm giving you a chance to show them who you really are. What's it going to be?" He looked at the contract, then at the pen. He thought of Ivy, of her small hand in his, of the beeping machines that were counting down the seconds of her life. He reached out and picked up the pen. The choice had never really been his to make. The weight of the pen felt foreign in his hand. For 8 years, his hands had known the rough grip of a mop handle, the worn plastic of a spray bottle, the soft cloth of a rag. This pen, a sleek, silver instrument worth more than his monthly paycheck, felt like a relic from another life. He took a breath, the recycled air of the office tasting of money and impossible choices, and signed his name, Dr. Dawson Carr. A ghost putting on skin again. Helena nodded once, a gesture of finality. She took the contract, handing it to her lawyer without a second glance. The deal was done. "Good," she said. "Clara will show you to your office." The severe-looking woman from the hallway stepped forward. "Mr. Carretera, this way, please." Dawson stood, his legs unsteady. "My title," he began, not sure what he was even asking. "You don't have one," Helena said, already turning back to her computer. "Your title is a result. Find it for me." Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to save." Clara led him not to a polished executive suite, but down a stark, white corridor to a heavy door with a keypad lock. She punched in a code, and the door clicked open. "This will be your workspace," she said, her tone flat. "It's a secure room. No network access to the outside. All communications are internally monitored. Food, coffee, anything you need, you tell me. You don't leave this floor without my clearance. Miss Langdon's orders." The room was a windowless, white-walled box, dominated by a large central table. 3 high-powered computers sat on the table, their screens dark. An entire wall was a whiteboard, clean and waiting. It was sterile, isolated. It was a cell, or a war room. Dawson wasn't sure which. "Ms. Langdon has authorized full access to the merger data stream," Clara said, tapping one of the keyboards. The monitors flickered to life, displaying cascading folders and files. Every email, every draft, every internal memo. The full, unredacted Danish language contracts are in the primary folder. If you need anything else, ask. She placed a burner phone on the table. "This is your direct line to Ms. Langdon and myself. Don't lose it." She paused at the door. "And Mr. Carré, welcome to Langdon Enterprises." The door clicked shut, and Dawson was alone. He stared at the screens, at the mountain of data that represented the deal. For a moment, the sheer volume was paralyzing. This was the world he had run from. A world of words used as weapons, of commas that could bankrupt nations. He took a deep breath, and then, slowly, something inside him began to stir. The old instincts. The part of his brain that saw language not as words, but as a system, a beautiful, complex machine. He sat down and began to work. He ignored the English translations, the summaries from the legal team. He went straight to the source, the original Danish documents. He read not just the words, but the spaces between them, the choice of a particular adjective, the structure of a complex sentence, the deliberate use of archaic legal phrasing in one section and hypermodern slang in another. It was a linguistic fingerprint, and it was arrogant. Madsen had been so sure no one was looking. By noon, his jacket was off, his sleeves were rolled up, and the whiteboards were covered in scribbled notes, connecting phrases and terms with angry red lines. He was fueled by lukewarm coffee and a cold, rising fury. He wasn't just a linguist anymore, he was a hunter, and he was beginning to pick up the scent. He found the first real clue buried in an email chain from 3 months prior, a conversation between Henrik Madsen and his chief counsel in Copenhagen. They were discussing the final structure of the patent-sharing clause. Madsen's lawyer expressed concern that the language was too aggressive. Madsen's reply was a single, dismissive line in Danish. "Bear rolig. Vi bor Amsterdam-modellen. Den virker hver gang." "Don't worry. We're using the Amsterdam model. It works every time." Dawson stared at the phrase, the Amsterdam model. It wasn't a legal term. It was a nickname, coded language, a playbook. This wasn't a one-time deception. It was a strategy, something they had done before. This changed everything. The burner phone rang, startling him. It was Helena. "Report," she commanded, her voice tense. "I'm working on a theory," Dawson said, his eyes still glued to the screen. "I don't pay for theories," she shot back. "I just got off a call with the board. They're panicking. Madsen's media blitz is working. He's positioned himself as the victim of a volatile, untrustworthy American corporation. We're losing investors. The stock is down 4%. I need a weapon, Dawson, not a book report." "The contract isn't the whole story," Dawson said, thinking fast. "It's a template. I think they've done this before. There's a reference here to the Amsterdam model." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Amsterdam?" Helena repeated. 2 years ago, the Dutch tech firm Vandergeld collapsed 6 months after a merger with a foreign investment group. No one understood what happened. It was a bloodbath. "Let me guess," Dawson said. a cold certainty creeping into his voice. The investment group was a subsidiary of Madsen's company. "I'll have my people look into it," Helena said. Her voice had changed. The impatience was gone, replaced by a grim focus. "Find me more. Find me a direct link." She hung up. The hours bled together. Dawson didn't notice the day fading into night. Clara brought him a sandwich he didn't touch. His mind was a whirlwind of syntax and subtext. He felt the familiar, obsessive pull of the work, the thrill of the chase. It wasn't until his watch alarm buzzed at 8 p.m. that he remembered. Ivy. He leaned back, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. He was doing this for her, yet he had forgotten to even call the hospital for an update. He grabbed the burner phone, then stopped. He couldn't call from here. He was in a cage. He buzzed Clara on the intercom. "I need to go to the hospital," he said, his voice strained. "Ms. Langdon said you're not to leave this floor," she replied coolly. "It's my daughter," he snapped, a raw edge of panic in his voice. "I need to see my daughter." There was a long silence. Finally, Clara's voice came back, softer this time. "You have 2 hours. A car's waiting for you in the basement. It will bring you back here. Don't be late." The ride to the hospital was a blur. When he walked into Ivy's room, she was awake, listlessly watching a cartoon on the small TV. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Daddy, you came!" He rushed to her side, hugging her small, frail body. "Of course I came, Firefly. Always." "You didn't come this afternoon," she said, her lower lip trembling slightly. "The nurse said you were busy, at a new job." The guilt was a knife in his chest. "I was, sweetie. It's complicated, but I'm here now." She looked at his clothes, at the dark circles under his eyes. "Do you like the new job?" He thought of the windowless room, the burner phone, the arrogant words of a man who broke companies for sport. He thought of Helena Langdon's cold, demanding voice. And then he thought of the check that would be deposited into his account, of the medical bills that would simply disappear. "It's the most important job in the world, Ivy," he whispered, stroking her hair. "Because it's going to make you better." She seemed to accept that, snuggling against his arm. They watched the cartoon in silence for a while. As he sat there, the quiet beeping of the machines, a familiar lullaby. He felt the profound, painful split in his life. He was a father and a weapon, a healer and a hunter. His 2 hours were up in what felt like 10 minutes. Leaving her was harder than it had ever been before. As he stood at the door, she called out to him. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Firefly." "Will you be here to read me a story tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'll try, Ivy. I promise, I'll try." He walked out of the hospital and into the waiting black car, the promise hanging in the air. Back in the sterile war room, surrounded by the secrets of powerful men, he pushed the image of his daughter's hopeful face from his mind and got back to work. He had to find the truth, not just for Helena Langdon, but for Ivy, because promises, like contracts, were only as good as the person who signed them, and he would not let his be broken. For 3 days, Dawson lived in the White Room. He slept on a small cot Clara had brought in, showered in the executive gym, and subsisted on a diet of black coffee and adrenaline. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the data stream, the whiteboards, and the ghost of a company called Vandergeld. Helena's team had worked miracles, pulling strings and greasing palms to get him the sealed records from the Amsterdam merger. It was a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore holding companies designed to be impenetrable. For 2 days, he and a team of forensic accountants Helena had assigned to him remotely hit one dead end after another. The money trail was a ghost, vanishing into thin air in the Cayman Islands. Frustration gnawed at him. He was failing. Every hour he spent chasing financial phantoms was an hour Madsen was winning, and an hour Ivy was spending without him. He had missed his chance to read her a story last night, the guilt a cold knot in his stomach. On the morning of the third day, Helena stormed into the room, her face like a thundercloud. She threw a tablet onto the table. On the screen was a business news alert. Langdon Enterprises stock plunges 11% amid merger controversy. "The board is trying to force a vote to oust me," she said, her voice a low, controlled fury. "They want to accept Madsen's revised offer, which includes a penalty clause for the delay. They're calling it a settlement. I'm calling it a surrender. They've given me 48 hours to produce irrefutable proof of fraud, or I'm out. And you're out with me. What do you have?" "The money trail is a dead end," Dawson admitted, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "It's too clean, professionally laundered." "Then find something else," she roared, the sound echoing in the small room. "I hired a linguist, not an accountant. Do your job." Her words, meant to sting, instead sparked an idea. He had been looking at the puzzle the wrong way, focusing on the numbers. He needed to focus on the people. "Get me everything you can on the Vandergeld executives," he said, a new energy in his voice. "Interviews, press clippings, public statements, anything they said after the collapse. Especially the CFO, Peter Vandermeer." "What are you looking for?" Helena asked, skeptical. "A mistake," Dawson said, turning back to his computer. "People can hide money. It's harder for them to hide the way they talk." For the next several hours, he sifted through a new mountain of data. Dutch financial news articles, translated transcripts, blog posts. Most of it was useless corporate speak. But then he found it, an obscure interview on a small, independent financial podcast, recorded a year after the Vandergeld collapse. The host was asking Peter Vandermeer how such a successful company could fall apart so quickly. Vandermeer, his voice heavy with defeat, described the final negotiations. And then he used a phrase, a strange, specific Danish idiom. "Vi blev ført in I løvens hule med bind for øjnene." "We were led into the lion's den blindfolded." Dawson froze. His blood ran cold. It was the exact same, slightly archaic idiom Henrik Madsen had used in an email to his team right after his first meeting with Helena. It wasn't a common phrase. For a Dutchman to use a Danish idiom was unusual. For two different men at the center of two identical corporate disasters to use the same rare phrase was statistically impossible. It was a linguistic fingerprint, a shared script. It meant they had talked. It meant Madsen, or someone on his team, had coached Vandermeer on what to say. He called Helena. When she entered the room, he pointed to the two phrases on his screen, side by side. "This is it," he said. She stared at the screen. "An idiom? You're betting my company on a figure of speech?" The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "The board will laugh me out of the room. I needed a smoking gun, Dawson, not a poem." "You don't understand," he insisted, standing up, his voice filled with a passion she hadn't heard before. "Language is mathematics. The odds of this being a coincidence are 0. This is a vocal tic, a shared piece of code. It proves communication. Vandermeer didn't just lose his company. He was part of the scam. He was given a script to read from after the fact. And this is him slipping up, using his coach's words instead of his own. This phrase is our smoking gun." Helena was silent for a long time, studying him. Then the screen, then him again. He could see the war in her eyes, the pragmatist fighting the gambler. She had built her career on data, on certainty. He was offering her a ghost story, a hunch based on the echo of a dead language. If he was paid off, she said slowly, thinking it through, he wouldn't be talking to financial podcasts. He'd be on a beach somewhere. Unless he was double-crossed, Dawson countered. "Madsen strikes me as the kind of man who cuts loose ends. Vandermeer was the public face of the collapse. He lost everything. His reputation, his career. He's not a partner in the crime. He was the fall guy." Helena walked to the whiteboard and stared at the mess of lines and scribbled notes, at the architecture of a grand deception he had mapped out. She tapped a finger against her lips. Then she turned to him, a new, dangerous light in her eyes. "All right, doctor," she said. the title now sounding less like a mockery and more like a weapon. You have a ghost. I'll help you find him. She picked up the burner phone and dialed. Clara, I want everything you can find on a Peter Vandermeer. Last known address, financial status, current whereabouts. Use our European security contractors. I want to know where he is, now. As Helena put her corporate machine in motion, Clara entered the room, her face pale. She wasn't looking at Helena. She was looking at Dawson. There's a problem, Clara said, her voice hushed. Security just flagged an external inquiry. A journalist from the Financial Chronicle is calling your old university. He's digging into the details of your resignation, asking about the scandal. Dawson felt the floor drop out from under him. Madsen. He wasn't just fighting in the press anymore. He was coming for him personally. Clara continued, her voice even lower. And 5 minutes ago, someone tried to remotely access the patient records at City General Hospital. Specifically, they targeted the file for a pediatric patient, a girl named Ivy Carr. A white-hot rage, cold and pure, surged through Dawson. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in 8 years. The game had changed. This wasn't about a contract anymore. This was a threat against his daughter. The burner phone on the table buzzed. It was Helena's security chief. She put it on speaker. We found him, Ms. Langdon, the gruff voice said. Peter Vandermeer. He's not in Amsterdam. He's living under his wife's maiden name in a small fishing village, a place called Portree, on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. Helena looked at Dawson, whose knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. His face was a mask of cold fury. He's hiding, Helena said softly, a plan already forming in her mind. He's running from something. I think it's time we found out what. She ended the call and looked at Dawson. The predator in her eyes recognized the predator that had just been awakened in his. Pack a bag, she said. We're going to Scotland. The whir of the Gulf Stream's engines was a low, constant hum, a sound so alien to Dawson that it felt like a dream. Less than a week ago, his primary mode of transport had been a city bus that smelled of damp wool and disinfectant. Now he was sitting on a plush cream leather seat, 40,000 feet above the Atlantic, in a private jet so quiet he could hear the clink of ice in Helena Langdon's glass of water. She sat opposite him, not relaxing, but working. A stack of files was open on the polished table between them. She hadn't spoken a word since takeoff, her focus absolute. Dawson was a coiled spring of tension. The rage he'd felt in the war room had cooled into a hard, dense ball of dread in his stomach. They had threatened his daughter. It was a line that, once crossed, changed everything. He pulled out his own phone, his personal one, not the burner, and sent a text to the head nurse on Ivy's floor, a kind woman named Maria. Just checking in. How is she today? Helena looked up from her file. Clara arranged for a private security detail at the hospital. 2 men, around the clock. They're discreet. No one gets near her floor without clearance. Your daughter is safe, Dawson. The gesture was so unexpected, so profoundly practical, and yet so deeply thoughtful, that Dawson was momentarily speechless. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick. She's asking for you. Maria's reply came a moment later. A little sad today, but her vitals are stable. He closed his eyes, the guilt a familiar bitter taste. He was flying across the world to hunt a ghost while his daughter was alone in a hospital bed, asking for him. My father, Helena said suddenly, her voice quiet, pulling him from his thoughts. He built this company from nothing, worked 20 hours a day. I saw him on weekends sometimes. He used to tell me that business was a blood sport. She swirled the water in her glass. I didn't understand him then. I think I'm starting to. It was the most personal thing she had ever said to him. A small, carefully offered piece of herself. Dawson looked at her, at the woman who commanded armies of lawyers and analysts, and saw for the first time a flicker of the lonely girl who had waited for her father on weekends. Mine was a librarian, Dawson said. He believed the quietest words were the most powerful. Helena offered a rare, fleeting smile. He might have been right. They landed on a small airstrip on the Isle of Skye, under a sky the color of wet stone. The air was sharp and cold, smelling of rain, salt, and damp earth. A black Land Rover was waiting. As they drove, the landscape unfolded around them, a rugged, brutal beauty of jagged mountains and dark, sprawling lochs. It felt like a different planet from the concrete canyons of New York. The village of Portree was a small, colorful harbor huddled against the moody gray sea, a pocket of defiance against the wildness of the landscape. Helena's security team had already scouted the location. Peter van der Meer, living under the name Gijs Bakker, was a regular at a small, dark pub called the Salty Dog. He went there every afternoon at 4. They didn't go in with force. At 4:15, Dawson walked into the pub alone. It was dimly lit, smelling of old wood, stale beer, and the sea. He spotted him immediately. A man sitting alone in a corner booth, staring into a glass of amber liquid. He was a ghost. His hair was gray, his face puffy and lined with a map of sorrows. This wasn't the confident CFO from the Vandergeld press photos. This was a broken man hiding at the edge of the world. Dawson slid into the booth opposite him. "Mr. van der Meer," he said quietly in Dutch. The man flinched, his eyes darting around the pub, wide with panic. "I don't know who you're talking about," he stammered, his Dutch accented with fear. "My name is Bakker. You've made a mistake." "I don't think so," Dawson said, his voice gentle. "We have something in common, you and I. We were both meant to be the fall guy." Van der Meer's face went pale. "Leave me alone. I have nothing to say." "Is that what Henrik Madsen told you to say?" Dawson pressed. "I don't know any Henrik Madsen," Van der Meer hissed, his hands trembling. He made to stand up, to flee. Dawson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Really? Because I heard a different story. I heard you were led into the lion's den blindfolded." He said it in Danish, the exact, peculiar idiom. Peter van der Meer froze, his body rigid, his face a mask of pure terror. He stared at Dawson as if he'd just seen a ghost from his past materialize in this forgotten Scottish pub. He knew. This quiet American knew his secret. As if on cue, the pub door opened and Helena Langdon walked in. She moved with an easy, predatory grace, her sharp suit and confident air completely out of place, yet she commanded the space instantly. She walked to their booth and stood over the table, looking down at the terrified man. "Mr. van der Meer," she said, her voice calm but carrying the immense weight of her power. "My name is Helena Langdon. Henrik Madsen tried to do to me what he did to you. The difference is, he failed." Van der Meer just shook his head, muttering, "You don't understand. You need to go." "I'm not here to threaten you," Helena continued, ignoring him. "And I'm not here to offer you money. I'm here to offer you something far more valuable, justice. Help me, and I will put the entire legal and financial weight of my corporation behind you. I will give you the best lawyers in the world. I will provide full security for you and your family. I will help you destroy the man who destroyed you. You don't have to hide in the dark anymore." For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in van der Meer's eyes. It was a desperate, long-buried ember of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by a fresh wave of terror. "You can't protect me from him," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Madsen, he's not just a businessman. The people he works with, they don't just file lawsuits. He threatened my family, my son. He told me if I ever spoke a word of this to anyone, they would disappear. He erases people." The air in the pub grew colder. This was more than corporate fraud. This was dangerous. "All the more reason to fight back," Dawson said, his voice firm. "Hiding won't keep you safe forever." Peter van der Meer looked from Dawson's intense, determined face to Helena's powerful, unwavering gaze. He seemed to be weighing his fear of Madsen against this sudden, impossible chance at redemption. He drained his glass of scotch in one ragged gulp, the liquid courage doing little to steady his hands. He stared out the grimy pub window at the stormy sea, at the gray waves crashing against the rocks. Finally, he turned back to them, his eyes hollow. "The proof you want," he said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "It's not on paper. It's not in a bank account." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's buried." The word hung in the air of the smoky pub, thick and heavy with meaning. "Buried?" Helena repeated, her voice sharp, cutting through the low murmur of the bar. "What do you mean, buried? Where?" Peter Vandermeer shook his head, looking nervously toward the door as if expecting Madsen's enforcers to walk in at any moment. "Not here. We can't talk here." He led them out of the pub and down a narrow cobbled alley that smelled of brine and wet stone. The wind whipped in from the sea, cold and relentless. He stopped in the shadow of an old stone wall, his shoulders hunched against the gale. "Before they forced me out," he began, his voice a ragged whisper, "I knew Madsen would try to erase everything. The threats, the real contracts. So I made a copy. Of all of it. The original unredacted agreements, the unencrypted email servers, audio recordings of my calls with him, everything you need to prove the fraud." "Where is it?" Dawson pressed, his voice urgent. "It's in a digital vault, a private encrypted server in Zurich. Air-gapped, not connected to any network," Vandermeer explained, his words tumbling out. "To access it, you need 2 cryptographic keys. They have to be entered at the same time from 2 different IP addresses. It's a dead man's switch. I have one of the keys." "And the other one?" Helena asked, her eyes narrowed, already seeing the complication. Vandermeer's face fell, the brief flicker of defiance gone. "That's the problem. I gave the second key to the only other person at Vandergeld I trusted, our head of IT, Anja Schmidt. She knew something was wrong too. She helped me create the vault. But after the collapse, she disappeared. Madsen's people went after her. I don't know where she is. I don't even know if she's alive." The hope that had flared in the pub dimmed. They had found one ghost, only to be sent on a hunt for another. "The board meeting is in less than 36 hours, Helena said, her mind already calculating odds and logistics. "We don't have time for a scavenger hunt across Europe. We need to go back." "I can't go with you," Vandermeer said, shaking his head frantically. "He'll know. If I leave here, my family—" "You're more of a target hiding than you are with me," Helena stated coldly. "But fine. Give him your key." She nodded at Dawson. With trembling hands, Vandermeer reached into the lining of his worn coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Dawson. On it was a complex 64-character alphanumeric code. A key to a kingdom, or to a tomb. "Find Anja," he pleaded, his eyes locking onto Dawson's. "She was brave. She deserves to have her name cleared." The flight back to New York was even more tense than the journey out. They had a fragile lead, but no tangible proof to show a board of directors who were ready to sacrifice their CEO to appease a predator. Halfway across the Atlantic, Helena broke the silence. "Tell me about the scandal, Dawson." It wasn't an order this time. It was a quiet request. "The real story?" Dawson looked out the small window at the endless expanse of dark clouds below. "It wasn't a scandal," he said, his voice low. "It was a sacrifice. My mentor, Professor Albright, and I were developing a linguistic modeling AI. It was groundbreaking. It could predict market shifts based on the emotional subtext of public communications." Helena's eyes widened slightly. Such technology would be priceless. "A rival corporation, a major university donor, got wind of it," Dawson continued. "They stole our foundational research and published a version of their own. The university panicked. They threatened to sue the school into oblivion, and the administration needed a scapegoat to blame for academic negligence." Professor Albright. He had a weak heart. A public inquiry like that would have killed him. He was my mentor, my friend. He saw something in me no one else did. Dawson paused, the memory still sharp and painful. So I took the fall. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, admitted to negligence I didn't commit, and walked away. It was the only way to save him. Helena stared at him, processing the information. You threw away your entire career for loyalty. Some things are worth more than a career, Dawson said simply. When they landed at the private airfield in New Jersey, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Clara was waiting on the tarmac, standing beside a black SUV. The look on her face was grim. We have a problem, she said, handing Helena a tablet. It broke an hour ago. It's everywhere. Helena took the tablet. The headline was plastered across the top in bold, sensational letters. Langdon's last gamble. CEO bets billion-dollar company on disgraced academic and accused fraud. Beneath it was Dawson's old university ID photo. The article was a brutal, one-sided assassination of his character, twisting his resignation into a story of theft and incompetence. Madsen had done exactly what he'd threatened to do. He hadn't just come after Dawson. He had publicly crucified him. Dawson felt the blood drain from his face. This was his nightmare realized. The anonymity he had guarded for 8 years had just been shattered for the entire world to see. He saw his own face staring back at him from a news monitor inside the private terminal. His past wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a headline. "He knows you're my weapon," Helena said, her voice dangerously calm, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the tablet. "So he decided to break you before I could even use you." She looked at Dawson, gauging his reaction. The board meeting was in 10 hours. Their only lead was a cryptic key in his pocket. And now, her star witness had just been publicly branded a liar. "The board will see this," Dawson said, his voice hollow. "They'll never believe a word I say now." "No," Helena replied, a cold fire igniting in her eyes. "They won't, which is why you're not going to be the one talking to them." The SUV sliced through the waking city, a black arrow aimed at the heart of the storm. "To the board, you're not a witness, you're a liability," Helena stated, her voice a simple, brutal assessment of their new reality. "A janitor with a fabricated past that I, in a moment of weakness, chose to believe. That will be the narrative." "So what's the plan?" Dawson asked, his voice rough. "It's over." "Over?" Helena turned to him, her eyes blazing. "This is a pivot. You wanted to be invisible, Dawson. Madsen just gave you your wish. No one on that board will be looking for you now. They'll be too busy watching me." As the car descended into the secure garage, she gave her final order. "I'm going to that board meeting alone. My job is to draw their fire, to bluff, to lie, to buy you time. Your job is to find Anya Schmidt. You have until the end of that meeting. You are no longer a consultant, Doctor. You are a ghost. Now go haunt someone." Rushed back to the windowless war room, Dawson began the hunt. He instructed Clara to pull all of Anya Schmidt's data, emails, performance reviews, chat logs. As the files flooded in, he began to build a psycholinguistic profile, searching for her unique voice. He found it in her fondness for astronomy metaphors and a specific grammatical quirk, a consistently omitted Oxford comma when listing 3 items. Meanwhile, on the 40th floor, Helena walked into the boardroom. The air was thick with hostility. Arthur Pendleton sat at the head of the table, exuding a smug, predatory calm. "Helena," Pendleton began, "we have all seen the morning's news. You've wagered this company's reputation on the word of a disgraced janitor. I move that we vote to accept Madsen's revised offer and demand your immediate resignation." "The story is a lie, Arthur," Helena said coolly. "A transparent attack by Madsen because we have him cornered." "Witness?" another board member scoffed. "His credibility is 0. As the board prepared to turn on her, Dawson's personal phone buzzed. It was Mariah, the nurse. "Dawson, it's Ivy," she said, her voice tense. Her fever is spiking. The doctors are worried about a potential infection. She's scared. She's asking for you. The words were a physical blow. Ivy needed him. He looked at the screens, at the ghost he was chasing, then pictured his daughter's pale face. He closed his eyes, his hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Maria," he said, his voice a sound of pure agony. Tell her I love her, and tell her Daddy is fighting a monster for her. I can't come. Not right now." He hung up, a wave of self-loathing washing over him. He turned back to the screen, channeling his grief, his guilt, his rage into the search. He wrote a complex search algorithm looking not for a name, but for a voice matching Anya's linguistic fingerprint. He found it, a post on an obscure forum for Aurora Borealis chasers. The user, Cygnus X1, had written a technical review. "It's a fantastic piece of kit for catching comet tails, meteor showers, and planetary alignments. But be warned, the user manual is a black hole of confusing information." 3 items. No Oxford comma. The space metaphors. It was her. Her profile listed her location as Yellowknife, Canada. He'd found her. In the boardroom, the rebellion was reaching its climax. "We have wasted enough time," Pendleton announced. "All in favor of removing Ms. Langdon as CEO?" Hands went up. Helena watched, her face a mask of stone, as her empire crumbled. Just as Pendleton was about to declare the vote, the burner phone in her pocket vibrated. A text from Dawson, Anya Schmidt, followed by a secure video link. Helena looked up at the hostile faces. A slow, triumphant smile touched her lips. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice like a diamond, "before you finalize that vote, there's someone I'd like you to meet." She tapped a command, and a massive screen descended from the ceiling. It flickered to life, showing the face of a woman in a heavy parka, the green ribbons of the Aurora Borealis dancing behind her. "Who the hell is that?" Pendleton demanded. "Gentlemen," Helena announced, her voice ringing with power, "allow me to introduce Anya Schmidt, former head of IT at Vandergeld." A ripple of shock went through the room. Guided by texts from Dawson, Helena began her questions. "Mrs. Schmidt, can you confirm the existence of the Amsterdam model?" "Yes," Anya said, her voice clear and strong. It was Henrik Madsen's term for a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. "He did it to us." Pendleton scoffed. "This is hearsay." "Miss Schmidt, why did you disappear?" Helena pressed. Anya's face hardened. "2 men came to my apartment. They knew where my sister worked. They told me if I ever spoke about what happened, my family would pay the price. So I ran." The room was silent. This was a criminal conspiracy. "Do you still have your key to the vault?" Helena asked. Anya pulled a small USB drive on a chain from her collar. "I've worn it every day for 2 years. Waiting." Helena glanced at her phone. Dawson's text was simple. "I'm ready. As you know," she told the board, her authority absolute. "Access requires 2 keys, entered simultaneously. Ms. Schmidt has one, and thanks to the man you just condemned, we have the other." In the war room, Dawson had the Zurich Vault's portal open. In Yellowknife, Anja inserted her USB drive. Thousands of miles apart, 2 ghosts prepared to turn their keys. "Now," Helena commanded. Dawson hit enter. Anya did the same. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a soft chime, and the vault opened. Folders flooded Dawson's monitor. He clicked on one labeled Audio. He found a file dated the week before the Vandergeld merger and played it. "Stream this to the boardroom, Clara," he said, his voice tense. "Now." The boardroom speakers crackled. Henrik Madsen's voice filled the room, stripped of all charm. "The board are a pack of old fools, Peter," the recording sneered. "Are you having second thoughts?" Then, Peter Vandermeer's voice, thin with fear. "Henrik, I don't know if I can." "You will do exactly as you are told." Madsen's voice turned to ice. or I can't guarantee your son will make it home from his university classes safely. Do you understand me? Accidents happen." A wave of revulsion swept through the room as Madsen went on to detail the entire fraud. The audio ended. The silence was absolute. The smoking gun. Dawson, listening from the war room, looked at the small photo of Ivy on his desk. He had fought the monster. In the boardroom, Helena stood over the stunned, horrified men. She looked directly at Arthur Pendleton, whose face had crumpled in defeat. "Arthur," she said quietly, "I believe you were calling for a vote." The aftermath was swift. Helena turned to her chief counsel. "Peters, get our teams on a call. I want injunctions filed against every known asset of Madsen's company. Contact the SEC, the Department of Justice, and Interpol. Give them everything." With her orders given, she walked straight to the war room. Dawson was watching the news feeds, his face pale with exhaustion. The power dynamic between them had dissolved, replaced by the quiet respect of two soldiers who had survived a war. "We won," she corrected him when he said she had. She glanced at the photo of Ivy. "Go to her, Dawson." She slid a thin platinum credit card across the desk. "This is a corporate account with no limit. Use it for whatever she needs. The best doctors, treatments, anything. My promise is kept. Your daughter's care is covered. For life." Dawson simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. He walked out the front doors into the morning sun, no longer a ghost, and took a cab to the hospital. Ivy's chart had a new note. Fever broke at 8:30. Vitals stable. Relief, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees, washed over him. He was sitting by her bed when she stirred. "Daddy," she whispered. "I'm here, Firefly." She smiled, a real smile that lit up her face. "Did you fight the monster?" "Yeah, baby," he said, his own smile breaking through. "We fought the monster, and we won." The story of the fraud exploded into the media. Madsen's empire began to crumble. Dawson's name was mentioned as the confidential informant, whose expertise had been key, his reputation reborn from the ashes. That evening, Helena appeared at the hospital door, dressed not in a power suit, but in simple slacks and a sweater, holding a small gift. "For Ivy," she said quietly, placing a book about constellations on the table. They stood in a comfortable silence. "I came to offer you a job," she said finally. "A permanent one. I'm creating a new department, the Office of Strategic Integrity. Its job is to find the flaws we're too close to see, to listen to the people no one else is listening to. I don't want a department head. I want a founder. I want you." Dawson looked from her determined face to his sleeping daughter. The storm had passed. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll do it." 6 months later, Dawson stood by the large window of his new office. He could see the sky. In the wake of the storm, he had built the Listening Room, a department that sought out the brilliant, overlooked people within the company, giving them a voice. Henrik Madsen had been arrested and was facing life in prison. The monster was caged. As Dawson worked, his personal phone rang. It was Ivy's oncologist, Dr. Alistair. "Dawson," the doctor's voice was bright. "We have the results from Ivy's latest scans. The new treatment worked better than we could have ever imagined. The markers are all clear." Dawson sank into his chair. "She's in remission, Dawson. Full remission. Your daughter is coming home." He hung up, tears of pure joy streaming down his face. He didn't pack his desk. He just grabbed his coat and walked out. An hour later, he was pushing a wheelchair out of the main doors of City General Hospital. In it sat Ivy, small and pale, but with a radiant light in her eyes, wearing a bright yellow coat. She was no longer attached to machines. She was free. That evening, they sat wrapped in a blanket on the balcony of their new, sun-filled apartment overlooking a park. Ivy was leaning against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yeah, Firefly?" She looked up at him, her face full of a quiet, curious joy. "What language should we learn how to speak next?" Dawson pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. He thought of all the languages that had saved them, and he realized none of them mattered as much as the one they were speaking right now. He looked down at his daughter, his brilliant, brave little girl, and smiled. "I think," he said softly, "we're already fluent in the only one that counts. Sometimes the most valuable people are the ones we're trained not to see." This story is a reminder that a person's worth isn't defined by their title, but by their character, and that a father's love is a force powerful enough to change the world. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Where are you watching from tonight? Your words create a community, and that community is a powerful thing. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in stories that celebrate the quiet heroes. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, be kind, be brave, and never underestimate the person holding the mop.